also talk about the Iron Dome of Ayodhya. If you could just explain and contextualize it in the contemporary world.
So Iron Dome is something that Israel has today. So Israel is under attack of missiles from all around, right? So what they did was, Israelis, to protect themselves, is that they had a defense system. So they were able to predict where the missile is coming from, and then the Iron Dome is something like missiles that can be carried across, so they can be wheeled across. They are even missiles that they have on boats. So this is like these interpret the incoming missiles, and then they just burst them up so that the missile doesn't land in either Jerusalem or in Israel, let's say, right? So this is a very smart thing. Now, the reason this has happened is Israel is widespread, right? So they have something that they can wheel around. So if anybody even Googles and takes a look at the pictures of Iron Dome, they're only going to see 5-7 missiles, with wheels, and you can sort of take them around and move them around. They can be on ships. The reason they have wheels today is because no longer are we staying in forts. In ancient times, all districts were in forts. So, in ancient time, it's just 200-300 years ago. So it's not even ancient. It's still recent time. Most civilizations were living in forts. So you see Junagadh fort, this fort, that fort, right? And then people would slowly, spread around about, right? So, but in ancient times, they were very particular about this. So Ayodhya itself was a fortified district. What do I mean by a fortified district? It was within a fort. The fort had a rampart, like all forts have. And what is a rampart? A rampart is that area where the soldiers can come and go. They can, pull their weaponry across. All their weaponry is stocked. And then they had these atalikas. So atalikas are these towers which are around the corners of forts. So an atalika is slightly protruding, sometimes in it also, and slightly protruding, and it is higher than the wall of the fort. So what that allows you to do is to look further out. So what they did was that in order to protect Ayodhya, they had something called Shatagni, which was again like a missile. And if there was an invasion on Ayodhya, they would shoot this. And the Shatagni, if you do Sandhi Viched of this name, Shatagni, it means Shat means 100, and Agni comes from the Sanskrit root word Hant. Hant means to kill, to hunt. The English word hunt comes from here, right? The killer of hundreds, something that can kill 100. 100 killer of hundreds. So obviously, if it's killing hundreds of people, one of them is killing hundreds of people. So it's like a missile system. So this is again the continuity of civilization that we see, which is like in Israel, what Israel is following today, Israel is putting it on its borders, and Ayodhya too put it on its borders. And protect against what? Protect against invasions. They may be killing missiles. We don't know whether missiles are coming to Ayodhya, but we know if it is called Shatagni, that means it was targeted at people coming. So if, let's say, large armies were coming, this would then destroy that army, or this was aimed at destroying the whole army. So that's why it's called Shatagni, killer of hundreds. And this is the continuity of civilization I talk about. Even in warfare, things haven't really changed much.
Now that we are talking about warfare, you also talk about this army of Ayodhya. If you could just explain that how it was organized and how are the traditions being followed in today's world also.
Okay, so in ancient armies were Chaturangi armies. Now, what do you mean by a Chaturangi army? So the word Chaturangi comes from Chatur, which means 4, and Ang means part. So it had 4 parts. What are the 4 parts? The first part is infantry, which is like foot soldiers, right? The second part is Rath, which are chariots. Third part is elephants, so people are on elephants to in the army. Then you have the cavalry, right? So these are the four main parts of an army. And if you actually take a look at the armies today, they're also pretty much the same. There is infantry, which is the foot soldiers. They are the first. They are the first to go into any territory to attack. Generally, and then you have cavalry, horseback men. Then instead of rath and all, you've replaced rath and hathi are replaced by tanks and other kinds of guns, right? So this is what has happened. And even today, if you take a look at our borders, the infantrymen are always on the borders. The tanks, etc., are always. So the first form of defense and the first form of attack usually is infantry. Usually, I'm not saying strategies can change and vary. From this word Chaturangi comes the word Shatranj.
Oh.
Yes. So the concept of Shatranj and why so is certain as we go westwards. So for example, in Egypt, they cannot pronounce. So if you learn Egyptian Arabic, they cannot, they don't have g in the vocabulary. So they say j. So a lot of, they can't pronounce g, they say j. हमारे यहाँ j को g कह देते हैं, but तो चतुरंगी वो वेस्टवर्ड गया होगा तो वो शतरंज बन गया होगा. You see, so the game, so and if you take a look at the game of chess, it is intended for the idea, the concept behind developing a chessboard game was to train princesses. The prince, how do you train people in strategy? So and if you take a look, you have the foot soldiers. The pawns are the soldiers. They are the ones who go forward. The king and queen are there. Then wo wazir kehte hain, you might want to. Then you have the oont. Oont is there. Then ghoda hai. Right? So आपके चतुरंग तो हो ही रहे हैं ना. आप उसे वजीर कह लें. वजीर जो होते हैं, जो सीनियर्स होते हैं, वो रथ में चलते हैं usually. So chariots are usually so wazir, and if you take a look at their movements, so the movement is, so the horse can jump like this, the elephants can only go straight, and if you take up
ढाई चलता है
because the ghoda jumps, right? So if you take a, so this was done, the concept of Shatranj came to in order to train kings and princesses in battle strategy.
What a lovely explanation, Neena. Beautiful. Yes.
Thank you. So this is the concept from Chaturangi Sena. So all ancient armies were Chaturangi. Then we had, the word Shatranj comes from there. Then there is a word called Akshauhini. So the size of the armies were measured according to the Akshauhini. So for example, today we don't, today also we have certain terms that describe the same thing. So let's say Indian Army has XYZ number of divisions, and in those divisions you have brigades, and those brigades have units, and those units have battalions, and then battalions have units, and then in the battalion there are companies, and in the companies you have this. So the smallest measurement, so these are just names to measure it, and then then one whole big let's say a division, it has a particular number, it has everything sort of mapped even today, marked and mapped even today. So in ancient times, the minimum a king ideally should have had was an Akshauhini. So what is an Akshauhini? And by the way, this Chaturangi Sena and Akshauhini are chapter 22 and chapter 23 of my book. And the Akshauhini is also there, and I'm just going to give you how big the Akshauhini was. And all the data is given here, so anybody who's looking at it can read what is the minimum, and how the numbers are being counted. So for example, the smallest tukdi, the smallest portion of the army used to be called a patti. A patti is just like a strip. It is a strip. Okay, patti even today is a strip, thin strip, right? So it is one chariot, one elephant, 3 horses, and 5 foot soldiers who were the first line, right? Now, this was the ratio in which the whole army used to be divided. So there was a very fixed ratio, and the ratio was 1:1, 3:3, 5. And the 5 was like I said, 1 chariot, 1 elephant, 3 horses, and 5 foot soldiers. So if the army had to be expanded, it had to be expanded in this ratio. And then once you expanded a double, triple, 10 times this ratio, then you had the Akshauhini. So how many people, how many soldiers, how many horses came in this? So one Akshauhini contained of 21,870 chariots, 21,870 elephants, so 1:1. Then 65,610 cavalry, this is times 3, and 1,09,350 soldiers, this is into 5.
Oh.
So it's they followed this same, and they just multiplied. These all, so this was very, very precise. And Dashrath ji had one Ashkahini, minimum of one Ashkahini. He was the leader of that Ashkahini. And so he was the leader. Maybe his Senapati could have had, let's say, another Ashkahini, but that's the minimum that is spoken about here. And the Mahabharat War, which is considered in
18 Akshauhini.
Yes, in the Hindu history, it's the most, it's a very, very massive, large-scale, devastating war. There were 18 Ashkahinis. They fought for 18 days, and they all perished in 18 days. So you can imagine.
बहुत बड़ी, मतलब उस समय जो population, मतलब आप 18 लाख तो foot soldiers की बात कर रहे हैं. उससे थोड़ा ज्यादा ही होगा, क्योंकि ये तो लड़ने वाले थे और जो उनके
only on foot. And mind you, these are the soldiers. These are not the Senapati, these are not the generals, these are not the kings, these are just these soldiers, the basic line. And then every horse must have a ghursavar, right? Every elephant has a minimum of 3 people on it. So one is the person, the driver of the elephant, the mahout, okay? And then there are a minimum of 2 people on elephant back, maybe 3 or 4 as well, those who are fighting, right? Then you have chariots. Now a chariot has either 2 or 4 horses. So for example, Krishna Bhagwan and Arjun on their chariot, Krishna Bhagwan was the Sarthi. And so his chariot was 4 horses. And there were 2 people on the chariot. So Krishna Bhagwan was the Sarthi, and then Arjun was there. So similarly, there were around, 2 or 4 horse chariots. And then there was 1 Sarthi minimum, and 1 king, prince or whatever, and sometimes even 2. So 1 or 2 people who are fighting from the chariot. So for example, in the book, I've also mentioned that Kekai was fighting with Dashrath in the battle between the demons and the gods. And so she must have been with him in the chariot, right? Because she puts, the folk tale is that she puts her finger and saved. That means she was in the chariot with him, right? So there are a minimum of 2 to 3 people on the chariots, minimum of 3 to 4 people on, elephant back, and a minimum of 1 person on cavalry. So you can imagine 18 lakh are only the foot soldiers who are fighting. So you can imagine the vast number of people who fought in these wars.
When you, in your book, you also mentioned the people of Ayodhya. What made Ayodhya amazing was also the people part. So
in my book, I have mostly given reference of what is architecturally marvelous about Ayodhya, how it was established, very fascinating things. Like example, all the roads of Ayodhya were constantly wetted with water. They had flower petals on them, so it must have been very pleasant, very beautiful. I've given these kind of, the houses were gold plated, and, again, continuity of civilization. I've explained gold plating is a very ancient Hindu concept. And this was also all across the world. Gold plating of homes was across the world. In fact, in Egypt, it was practiced. In Latin America, it was practiced. In ancient Incan civilizations, Mayan civilizations, Egyptian civilizations, they all practiced, having gold all around them, right? And this again explains the continuity of civilization, and all of it is gone after the Abrahamics have landed to their doorstep, right? And so when I wrote this book, Amazing Ayodhya, so it was devoid of people's information, right? But any place that is amazing is made amazing by people. So people would ask me, tell us about the people of Ayodhya. So I made a very small talk on it, and I've put it on my YouTube channel where I've said, who made Ayodhya amazing? So I took just a few descriptions of the people that are mentioned so that people understand who and what made Ayodhya amazing. So who were those people? So those people are like the ministers of Ayodhya. So it talks about, those ministers are not swayed by anger. क्रोध से वो विचलित नहीं होते हैं, उनको घूस देने से विचलित नहीं होते हैं. And ऐसे ऐसे उनके मैंने traits दिए हैं. And why I have mentioned that is because if Valmiki is saying that they are not swayed by anger, by greed, or by fear, there are three things Valmiki says. So there are three things that make people, go against their own people. Why do people fall? Why? So the greed, anger, ego, and fear makes people do wrong things. So he says that these are traits that we don't find in the ministers of Ayodhya. Then he speaks of the spies of Ayodhya. So he says, and I've mentioned this as well. So these are the people who made it amazing. How can a country stay on top of what is happening across the world? This can happen if your spies are very good. So there is a saying that there is nothing that happens in other kingdoms or across the world that they don't know. And there is nothing that has happened that they're unaware of. And there's nothing that will happen in the future that they're also unaware of. So all events that have happened and all events that are going to happen in the future, they're aware because, they have spies. And so a king who had these spies was called दूरदर्शी. दूर क्या फ्यूचर में जो होने वाला है वो भी दूर है, और जो अलग कंट्री में बहुत दूर हो रहा है वो भी दूर है, तो वो दूरदर्शी कहलाया जाता था. So this is the reason for kings being called कि बड़ा दूरदर्शी राजा था वो. This is the reason.